who are you to tell us, what we should do or what we shouldn't do? And Achilles in particular, as the best warrior of the Greeks, feels that he shouldn't really have to listen to Agamemnon. He's their MVP, right? Why should he have to listen to the coach? He can do whatever he wants. So this fight gets really out of hand, and Agamemnon at some point threatens Achilles. And what he says to Achilles is, I'm going to take away your war prize. And Achilles' war prize, the war prize in question, is a beautiful young princess whose name is Briseis. So Agamemnon says, I'm going to take away Briseis. And Achilles is enraged. This is the rage that the Iliad begins with. Sing, goddess of the terrible rage of Achilles. It's his reaction to the loss of this war prize, this woman. And a lot has been made of that moment in various interpretations and adaptations. People have looked at a romantic relationship between Achilles and Briseis. But if you really go back to the ancient Greek, there are some hints of that. But what you really see is that it's a deadly insult to Achilles' honor. That taking away his war prize, which is the symbol of Achilles' excellence, it's the symbol of him being the best warrior of the Greeks, if you take that away, now how does anyone know he's the best anymore? And not only is it taken away, but it's taken away by Agamemnon. So Agamemnon says, you're not the best, and I decide who's the best. So it's kind of a double insult. And here is Achilles, who's given up everything in his life, literally his life, for his reputation, and now his reputation is being threatened by Agamemnon in taking this woman. So Achilles has no choice. He sort of has to hit the nuclear button. He says, okay, that's it. I'm not going to fight for you anymore. And he storms back to his tent, and he says, let's see how you do if I refuse to fight for you. That will teach you a lesson. And he also goes immediately, he's so angry that he has to go to his mother. Now, Achilles' mother is a sea nymph. She's a goddess, as often happens in these ancient stories. So he goes immediately to the ocean and kind of calls to his mother, calls her out of the ocean, and he says, Mom, Agamemnon has been really mean to me, and I want you to help me get him. And his mother agrees. So the two of them cook up this plot together to have the Greeks start losing and the Trojans start winning, to teach the Greeks a lesson that they really do need Achilles. And the plan starts to work. The next day the Greeks go out to battle, and the Trojans, led by the great Trojan prince Hector, who is in many ways the real hero of the story of the Iliad, is on fire in the battlefield. He's driving the Greeks back into the camp. He's pressing against the very entrance to the Greek camp. And every other time, every other night for those 9 long years, the Greeks have been able to push the Trojans back into their city. But this night they can't. The Trojans camp on the plain right outside the Greek camp. And the big fear for the Greeks is actually that the Trojans are going to be able to break into their camp and burn their ships. Because here the Greeks are, they've been here for 9 years, and as long as they have their ships, they can still go home. They're an invading army. But as soon as their ships are burned, now they're refugees. They can't get home again. So it's really the ships that they're most worried about. And all the Greek commanders get together and they say, we're really in trouble. Hector's on fire. They're right outside the gates. I think tomorrow they're going to break in. Someone has to go talk to Achilles and see if they can convince him. So they send their smoothest talker, Odysseus. And Odysseus goes to talk to Achilles. And he says, Achilles, please, will you relent? We're really in trouble here. We really need you back. And Achilles says, no. Not unless Agamemnon personally comes and apologizes to me. Well, fat chance of that. Agamemnon is really very, very prideful and not likely to bend. So Odysseus goes away. The next day dawns. The Trojans do indeed break into the camp. They actually tear, one of the Trojan soldiers, Sarpedon, tears into the Greek camp through the wall with his bare hands. They get to the ships and they start burning the ships. And it's at this moment in the story that a character kind of steps in who we haven't really seen very much before. And the character's name is Patroclus. Now, he's appeared a little bit in a few scenes with Achilles. Homer has called him the most beloved companion of Achilles. But he really hasn't said anything. He's just been kind of there in the background. He's there when Odysseus comes to speak to Achilles. The most beloved companion, Patroclus, is there as well. He's, helping cook the dinner with Achilles, and so he's there, but we don't really hear from him. And at this moment, he takes a look at what's happening. The Trojans are in the Greek camp. They're burning the ships. Greeks are dying all around them. And Patroclus goes to Achilles and he says, Achilles, you have to do something. They're really going to die unless you do something. And Achilles says, no. And Patroclus says, how can you turn away from them? These are our friends. These are our comrades. We've been here with them for these 9 years. How can we just stop? And Achilles says, I don't care. They haven't done anything to me personally. Let them die. But Patroclus can't bear to watch them die. So he comes up with another idea. He says, Achilles, how about this? Give me your armor, and I'll put it on, and I'll lead our men out into the battlefield and pretend I'm you. And when the Trojans see me, they'll think it's you and they'll run away, so we'll save the Greeks, but you still won't have helped them. And Achilles says, okay. So Patroclus does this. He puts on Achilles' armor, he leads Achilles' troops out into the field, and as soon as the Trojans see Achilles, or who they think is Achilles, they immediately start running. They do not want to be caught with an angry Achilles, pinning them down in the Greek camp. So they take off back across the field, back to the city of Troy. And Patroclus, dressed as Achilles, follows them, and he is so excited that the plan has worked, that he's saved the Greeks, that he's going to, defeat the Trojans, that instead of, going back home and saying, yay, Achilles, the plan works, he keeps driving the Trojans across the plain, and he gets so jazzed and revved up that he actually jumps off his chariot and throws himself on the walls of Troy and starts trying to climb the walls of Troy at that moment. And those of you who know the ancient stories know that in Greek mythology, if you're doing well, you're supposed to stop. Because if you keep going, the gods are going to punish you. And indeed, the god Apollo, the great defender of the Trojan people, is sitting on top of the walls of Troy. And he knocks Patroclus off the walls. But Patroclus is still so excited that he throws himself again on the walls. And again, the god Apollo knocks him off. And this time, when Apollo knocks him off, he knocks off his helmet and all his armor as well. So it is now revealed to the entire Trojan army that this is not Achilles, after all. This is Patroclus. And I'm going to apologize because it's hard to know what counts as a spoiler if a story is 3,000 years old. But they do. The Trojans kill Patroclus. And there's a big fight over his body, but eventually the Greeks manage to rescue his body and they bring it back to Achilles. And it's really that moment in the Iliad that was the inspiration for the entire novel. Because Achilles' reaction to the loss of Patroclus is so overwhelming, obliterating. It's as if a bomb has detonated in his life. We thought we saw him, we thought we knew what it was like to see Achilles angry before and his reaction to Agamemnon. His reaction at the loss of Patroclus is 10 times that. It's really unlike anything else in the rest of the work. He is completely overwhelmed with grief and rage. His first thought is actually to kill himself, but the other Greeks prevent him. And immediately his mind turns to thoughts of vengeance. But what drew me to that moment was really I wanted to understand why. What is this relationship about? Who is this Patroclus that we really see very little of other than his courageous action in trying to save the Greeks? Who is this man that means so much to Achilles? And I thought that here's Homer. Homer shows us the end of the story. He shows us in Achilles' reaction how much Patroclus means to him. But he doesn't tell us the beginning of their story. How did they come to be? How did they come to be friends? So what I wanted to do is sort of I set that moment on my horizon and wrote towards it. What's the story that happens before it and what happens after as well? So in doing this, I had to really go into the Iliad and try and find everything I could about Patroclus. And as I said, there's not very much there. It's really just little hints. So the first thing that Homer tells us is, as I said, Patroclus is the most beloved companion of Achilles. Homer also says that Patroclus has a very tragic backstory. Like Achilles, he was born a prince, but when he was a young boy, he accidentally kills another boy over a game. And he's exiled from his kingdom and taken in by Achilles. And Achilles, his father, basically as a charity case. So that's how they come to meet. They come to meet when they're very young. And because of this sort of horrific accident in Patroclus' life. So he's kind of an outsider from the beginning. He's an exile from his own kingdom who was, taken in by Achilles' generosity. Also, interestingly enough, he's called gentle, which those of you who know the ancient stories know that is not a word that gets thrown around a lot about ancient heroes. But there's a beautiful eulogy that's delivered over his body by Briseis, the slave woman that I mentioned at the beginning, the sort of cause of the argument by Achilles and Agamemnon. And she delivers this beautiful speech over Patroclus' body where she says, "You were always gentle," which I thought was very striking, very striking. Similarly, there's another speech by Menelaus, the king of Sparta, who is Helen's husband, kind of the reason for the whole war in the first place. And he's actually calling on the Greeks to help defend Patroclus' body after he's been killed so they can bring it back to Achilles. And he says, "Come on, Greeks, come on and defend Patroclus' body." He was kind to everyone. Also very surprising. He killed a lot of people, and he took a lot of gold, and he was really good at riding horses, but he was kind to everyone. Very unusual. So here you have this man who's gentle and kind to everyone, but who's the closest companion of Achilles, the most ferocious killer that the Greeks have. I thought that was very interesting. And finally, you have a beautiful detail at the end of the Iliad, which is that after Patroclus is killed and cremated, Achilles says, "Put his ashes in an urn, and when I'm dead, I want to be cremated and I want our ashes to be mingled together." I thought that was also a very powerful gesture. So using those moments from the Iliad, I sort of tried to create this story of their bond together, of their relationship. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to read two very, very short passages. I know some of you have read it, so they're very short. One is the beginning of Achilles and Patroclus' relationship, how they came to be friends. They're 11 years old in this section. So Patroclus has just killed the boy and been exiled and been taken in by Achilles, and the two boys are just starting to be friends. Our friendship came all at once after that, like spring floods from the mountains. Before, the boys and I had imagined that his days were filled with princely instruction, statecraft and spear. But I had long since learned the truth. Other than his lyre lessons and his drills, he had no instruction. One day we might go swimming, another we might climb trees. We made up games for ourselves of racing and tumbling. We would lie on the warm sand and say, "Guess what I'm thinking about?" The falcon we had seen from our window, the boy with the crooked front tooth, dinner. And as we swam, or played, or talked, a feeling would come. It was almost like fear in the way it filled me, rising in my chest. It was almost like tears in how swiftly it came. But it was neither of those. Buoyant where they were heavy, and bright where they were dull. I had known contentment before, brief snatches of time in which I pursued solitary pleasure, skipping stones, or dicing, or dreaming. But in truth it had been less a presence than an absence, a laying aside of dread. My father was not near, nor boys. I was not hungry, nor tired, nor sick. This feeling was different. I found myself grinning until my cheeks hurt, my scalp prickling till I thought it might lift off my head. My tongue ran away from me, giddy with freedom. This and this and this, I said to him. I did not have to fear that I spoke too much. I did not have to worry that I was too slender or too slow. This and this and this. I taught him how to skip stones, and he taught me how to carve wood. I could feel every nerve in my body, every brush of air against my skin. He played my mother's lyre, and I watched. When it was my turn to play, my fingers tangled in the strings, and the teacher despaired of me. I did not care. Play again, I told him, and he played until I could barely see his fingers in the dark. I saw then how I had changed. I did not mind anymore that I lost when we raced, and I lost when we swam out to the rocks, and I lost when we tossed spears or skipped stones. For who can be ashamed to lose to such beauty? It was enough to watch him win, to see the soles of his feet flashing as they kicked up sand, or the rise and fall of his shoulders as he pulled through the salt. It was enough. So in that section, I mentioned Achilles' lyre playing. And this is something that I wanted to talk about because this is another thing that really drew me to the character of Achilles in the mythology, which is that Achilles is not just known for being excellent as a fighter and as a warrior. He's actually excellent in a number of other things as well. He's known as the most beautiful of the Greeks, aside from being the best fighter, which is an interesting choice as well. And he's also known for having the most beautiful voice. And when Odysseus comes that night to try and convince Achilles to fight again, we actually see Achilles in his camp relaxing, playing the lyre and singing. And so music was incredibly important to him, and he was very skilled at it, which is a really interesting detail about him. Again, it sort of, I think, really rounds out his character. You know, we think of him as a killer in his rage, but here's this whole other life that he could have lived. You know, if he had chosen differently, would he have been Orpheus instead? Also interestingly about Achilles is he's one of very few ancient heroes who is not only a warrior, but also a healer. Achilles is trained by the great centaur teacher Chiron in all the arts of healing. And so he's incredibly valuable to the army because not only is he this tremendous warrior, but he also knows medicine. And there are really only a few ancient heroes like that. You can see how much doctors were valued in the ancient epics because the doctor Machaon, who's the son of Asclepius, you may have heard of Asclepius as sort of a demigod of medicine. Machaon, who's his son, is at the Trojan War fighting on the Greek side, and it's when he is wounded that the Greeks are in their greatest sense of despair. Oh, the healer is wounded. Now we're really in trouble. And so that's interesting too about Achilles, is that he really has this very complex character that I was interested in exploring, instead of just that, you know, single vision of him that we tend to get from the Iliad of his rage. So I wanted to go ahead and finish Achilles' story, going back to his rage. Now that we've talked about his non-rage, back to his rage. So he does indeed take vengeance upon the Trojans for the death of Patroclus. A terrible, terrible vengeance. He goes out and he is just slaughtering Trojans left and right. And before this moment, if you were, you know, a well-born Trojan and you found yourself on the other end of Achilles' sword, you could throw yourself on his mercy and say, my father has a lot of money and he'll pay you off if you let me go. And a couple men try this after Patroclus is killed, and Achilles refuses them mercy. He says, when Patroclus was alive, then I would give you mercy. But now there's no mercy left. Which is interesting because, of course, only one man has killed Patroclus, Hector, the Trojan prince that I mentioned. But he takes his vengeance on all the Trojans equally. And finally, he does catch up with Hector, and he kills him. But even that is not enough. He has to continue to exercise his rage on Hector's body. He pierces Hector's heels with leather and ties them to the back of his chariot and drags Hector's body around and around the walls of Troy while Hector's family watches from the walls above. A terrible, terrible vengeance. And even then, he doesn't bury the body, but he takes the body back to his tent, Hector's body, and keeps it there. And then when he gets angry again, he straps it to his chariot and again goes out and around and around. And he goes back to the tent and then back out, and just over and over, he can't let go of this rage. And at this moment in the story, you actually get one of the most famous moments, one of the most famous scenes in the Iliad, which is this beautiful scene where Hector's father, who's the king of Troy, his name is King Priam, he has seen many of his children killed in this war. He's very old, he's filled with dignity, he's one of the most sort of loving characters in the story. King Priam sneaks out of the walls of Troy, across the river, into the Greek camp, unseen. He has some help from the gods. And he sneaks into Achilles' tent, and he throws himself on Achilles' mercy. And he says, please, will you give me my son's body back? Will you let me bury him? And obviously, I think we can all understand the stakes that are present for Priam, but particularly in terms of the ancient world, if you didn't give a body proper burial rites, it meant that their spirit was going to wander lost forever, that they would never find peace. So for Priam, he's not just there fighting for closure for himself, for his wife, for his family, but also for Hector's soul. And there's this moment between Achilles, who's lost Patroclus, and Priam, who's lost his son Hector. And can these two men, these two enemies, find common ground? And it's a beautiful scene because they do. They do find common ground. Achilles is able to say, okay, I've lost someone, you've lost someone. I have a father who reminds me of you. I can give you back your son's body. And he does, and he sends the body of Hector back with Priam to Troy. And that's actually how the Iliad ends. It ends with the funeral of Hector, with Hector's family giving him proper funeral rites. So it really is a beautiful arc to the whole poem because it begins with Achilles' rage and it ends with the resolution of that rage, with Achilles is able to, he could never bend to Agamemnon, but he could bend to Priam. He could say, okay, and this closure, this moment of closure. Achilles' stories continue, but that's where the Iliad ends. And one thing that often surprises people is that the Iliad doesn't even include the story of the Trojan horse. The Trojan horse was told in other versions of myths, most famously in Virgil's Aeneid, but in other myths that were floating around and in other epic cycles. But the Iliad is really just that moment, Achilles' rage to Hector's funeral. So I had briefly mentioned the gods helping Priam. The gods are an incredibly important part of these ancient epics. And so before I start with questions, I thought I would read one more very short section, which is about Achilles' mother, who is, as I mentioned before, a goddess. So the section I'm going to read, again, the boys are 11 years old, and this is the first time that Patroclus is going to meet Achilles' goddess mother. The next night, when the household slept, I climbed out of our window. The moon was half full, bright enough for me to pick my way over the rocks without a torch. He had said that I was to stand in the surf, and she would come. No, he had reassured me. You do not need to speak. She will know. The waves were warm and thick with sand. I shifted, watched the small white crabs run through the surf. I was listening, thinking I might hear the splash of her feet as she approached. A breeze blew down the beach, and grateful, I closed my eyes to it. When I opened them again, she was standing before me. She was taller than I was, taller than any woman I had ever seen. Her black hair was loose down her back, and her skin shone luminous and impossibly pale, as if it drank light from the moon. She was so close I could smell her, seawater laced with dark brown honey. I did not breathe. I did not dare. "You are Patroclus." I flinched at the sound of her voice, hoarse and rasping. I had expected chimes, not the grinding of rocks in the surf. "Yes, lady." Distaste ran over her face. Her eyes were not like a human's. They were black to their center and flecked with gold. I could not bring myself to meet them. "He will be a god," she said. I did not know what to say, so I said nothing. She leaned forward, and I half thought she might touch me, but of course she did not. "Do you understand?" I could feel her breath on my cheek, not warm at all, but chilled like the depths of the sea. "Do you understand?" He had told me, too, that she hated to be kept waiting. "Yes." She leaned closer still, looming over me. Her mouth was a gash of red, like the torn open stomach of a sacrifice, bloody and oracular. Behind it, her teeth shone sharp and white as bone. "Good." Carelessly, as if to herself, she added, "You will be dead soon enough." She turned and dove into the sea, leaving no ripples behind her. So what I'd love to do now, actually, is throw it open to questions. Anything you want to ask about the writing process. There's plenty to say about the research, about the mythology. It took me 10 years to write the book. That was not planned. So really anything at all. I just want to make sure I'm talking about what you all would like to hear about. So, yes?
Do you do all your own research?
I do. The question is, do I do all my own research? I do. And I was very fortunate that I love this material and I have my master's in it, and so a lot of the research I had sort of just done because this was what I loved. I had even considered writing my master's thesis on sort of a history of depictions of Achilles through the ages. I ended up writing about something else, but I did all the research for it. So it was. I'm lucky that the research is all stuff that I love to know.
Thought about writing the synopsis of these great works, because your presentation was tremendous.
Oh, thank you.
And I think if you could write the story, in current language, and make it a very thrilling experience.
Thank you. The question was, have I considered writing the synopsis, writing summaries of the mythology? Sorry?
Yes.
I actually love to tell it. So I have thought a little bit about that. Actually, I was approached by a publisher asking if I wanted to sort of do an updated retelling kind of myth anthology, kind of like Edith Hamilton's. I would feel hubristic to follow in Edith Hamilton's steps, but something like that. And it's definitely something I would consider down the line. So, thank you. Yes?
In updating the story of Achilles, you inferred much more of a homosexual relationship between Patroclus and Achilles than I read in the original, or in the versions I've read. Does the reaction of Achilles' mother, you talked about Patroclus was gentle and those adjectives described him, but did the mother's reaction trigger that kind of interpretation for you, where she rejects Patroclus?
So the question is about the nature of the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus, and particularly in the novel, Achilles' mother, her name is Thetis, her very negative reaction to Patroclus. So I don't want to give too much away from the novel, but I can say that Achilles' mother's reaction to Patroclus is very complex, and I think it really is grounded in her hatred of humans. And she fairly is, I think, does not like humans, and I think she wants very much for Achilles to be a god, to be respected, to get all that fame that he's given up his life for. And I think she views Patroclus as mediocre, and therefore damaging to his to his sense of reputation, to his sort of, his fame.
But it wouldn't be seen as a typical mother's reaction to the thought that the son might be having a homosexual affair at this point.
No, and this was going to be the second thing that I was going to say, which is that the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus has been hotly debated, basically ever since the Iliad, was composed. And there have been a lot of people who have looked at their relationship and said Achilles and Patroclus are together, and people who have interpreted their relationship as no, they're the closest of friends, but they're not romantically together. And sort of the basic argument goes like this. People look at the Iliad and they say, Homer never says that Achilles and Patroclus are together. He never explicitly says that. And other people say, well, look at the Iliad and they say, Homer never says that they're together because it would have been so obvious to an ancient audience that people would have interpreted that way. We'll never know the real answer because we don't even know if Homer was a person, so we certainly can't ask him. But what we do know is that later Greek authors, in interpreting that relationship, absolutely felt free to make them lovers. So, for example, Plato references Achilles and Patroclus as sort of ideal lovers. We have a fragment of a tragedy by Aeschylus, the great tragedian Aeschylus. Unfortunately, the rest of the tragedy is lost, but we just have a few bits of it, and it's about Achilles and sort of his deeds during the Trojan War. And there's one of the fragments is of him mourning over Patroclus's body and talking about their frequent kisses. So, when you have kind of Aeschylus and Plato who are clearly interpreting that way, it counts as, I think, it's a pretty strong tradition. There are others like Xenophon who said no, they were close war companions, but they were not together. But I think what we see here is just that there's room for interpretation, that it's something that people have seen both ways. And for me, I think that what really suggested the interpretation that they were together was the intensity of Achilles' reaction to Patroclus' death, and also how he mourns for Patroclus' death, because it's incredibly physical in the Iliad. That he doesn't just grieve and want to kill himself and want to get vengeance. He actually embraces the dead body and holds it all night long and refuses to allow the body to be taken away from him. So for many days, Achilles doesn't allow Patroclus' body to be burned and buried as it should be, because he can't stand to let the body go. And it was really that, and sort of the idea of their ashes being together in the urn, that made me feel like that was the interpretation I wanted to go with. Yes?
Did the ashes really go into the urn, both ashes of both people? And where did the urn end up?
That is a great question. So the question is, did Achilles get his wish? Did the ashes end up in the urn with Patroclus? And do we know where that urn is? I wish we do. But in the stories, because the Iliad ends with Hector's death, not with Achilles' death, Homer doesn't tell us himself that they did end up in the urn with him. But we do know that in the Odyssey, when Odysseus goes down to the underworld, he sees Achilles and Patroclus together in the underworld, which I think we can interpret literarily that they did end up. That incident in the Odyssey, where Odysseus goes down to the underworld and sees them together, is a fascinating one, because Odysseus goes up to talk to Achilles. As usual, Patroclus doesn't talk when there's a group of people. He stays in the background. But Odysseus talks to Achilles, and he says, Achilles, here you are in the underworld. You got exactly what you wanted. You're completely famous. You're king of the dead. No one is a better warrior than you. Everyone, men sing your deeds all over the world. It must feel great. And Achilles says, no, I made the wrong choice. It's better to be alive and to be nothing than to be king of the dead, which I think is a fascinating reversal. That the whole Iliad is about him and his obsession with fame and posterity and with this choice he's made. And that in the Odyssey, when we meet him, he's reversed his choice. And so that was very much in my mind as I was creating the character and thinking about Achilles, that I wanted, by the end of the story, I wanted the Achilles that would have changed his mind. I'm just going to get new people first, and then I'll come back. Yes?
Can you touch on the section where Achilles is disguised as a woman looking to avoid the war?
Yes. So one of the myths, this is not mentioned specifically in Homer because it happens before the Trojan War happens. The question is about, there's a section in the mythology and therefore also in the book where Achilles dresses as a woman in order to hide himself from the war. Now this is not Achilles' idea in the mythology, this is his mother's idea. She knows that if he goes to Troy, he's not going to come home. And the thought of losing him is too much for her. So she convinces him to try and hide himself as a woman on this kind of Nowheresville island among this whole court of young women. So hopefully he won't be found. But Odysseus, they send Odysseus after him, and Odysseus figures out how to find him. I won't give away how. But it was a myth that was particularly popular in later times. It was very popular in Roman times, and particularly in you see it referenced a lot in like lyric poetry. The idea that even Achilles, wore a dress. That the mighty Achilles also did crazy things for love, because on that island, while he's dressed as a woman, he has an affair with the princess of the island, and she gets pregnant and has a child by him whose name is Pyrrhus or Neoptolemus. He's called both. Pyrrhus is kind of his nickname. It means fiery because he's supposed to have reddish hair, like pyre, like our word pyre. And so it's kind of a key episode because Achilles' son plays a very important role in the whole kind of end game of the Trojan War. Achilles isn't there for the Trojan horse, but Achilles' son is. And Achilles' son is actually the person who kills Priam. So it's an amazing, amazing reimagining of that scene between Achilles and Priam where they're in the tent and Priam throws himself on Achilles' mercy and Achilles grants him mercy. And then a year later, when Achilles' son meets Priam, Troy is burning around them, and Priam is on the altars, the most sacred place you can be in the center of Troy. And Achilles' son goes to him and slits his throat on the altar. So it's a shocking reversal. So I think that episode, there's a lot you can do with that episode, but what's really important about it is Achilles' son, who comes out of it, that he would never have met the mother from it. I hope that answers your question. Did you?
I always felt sorry for Hector. And I mean, it just my memory, because Achilles couldn't be killed. I mean, he was protected by the god. The only vulnerable spot he had on his body was his heel. Mm-hmm. So I mean, Hector didn't have a chance, and he chased Hector around the fortress. Chased him around and around and around, and Hector, I guess, knew that he couldn't kill Achilles. And, it seemed unfair, very unfair.
I agree with you. The question is about Hector and the unfairness of the matchup between him and Achilles. I agree, and Greek myths are always about unfairness. Hector is, as you pointed out, not the son of a god. His parents are mortal, Priam and Queen Hecuba. So right from the start, he's kind of starting from a disadvantage. But he also has the disadvantage of the fact that he has some really powerful gods aligned against Troy. Troy has some really powerful enemies. Enemy number one, Hera, queen of the gods. You never want her against you. She never gives up. You also have Athena, goddess of war and strategy, and goddess of wisdom, also don't want her on the other side. And Poseidon as well. And actually, Athena, in that critical fight between Achilles and Hector, Athena intervenes on Achilles' behalf. So it really is not fair. Yeah, it's dirty fighting, I agree. Interestingly enough, you mentioned the story of Achilles and the heel. That story is a later story. It's not in either the Iliad or the Odyssey. It was something that kind of came later.
He couldn't kill Achilles.
Well, he certainly knew that Achilles was faster than he was, and more importantly, Achilles was so angry that Achilles was not gonna ransom him. He wasn't gonna show any mercy. Achilles was there to kill Hector, and there was nothing that was going to stop him. So I think Hector knew that Achilles was much younger than Hector was. As I sort of mentioned before, I think in many ways Hector could really be seen as the true hero of the Iliad. He's the one who's defending his family.
That's right.
Yeah, he's there to protect his brothers, his father, his wife. There's a beautiful scene with Hector and his wife and his infant son. And so one of the things that's remarkable about the Iliad is here you have Homer himself was Greek, right, composing in Greek, but the Trojans come out looking much better than the Greeks do. And the Trojan heroes really get time. They really get stage time. This isn't just good versus evil, not at all. The Greeks look much worse than the Trojans do. So I think that's really interesting as well.
Question. Nobody else has it.
Yeah, go ahead, and then I saw a few more.
Oh, go ahead. No, take it.
No, it's okay.
In the Wagner's in this opera, four-set opera, Siegfried is connected with the god Screw, and I forget how he is unwoundable.
Mm-hmm.
He can't be killed except he was left. His back was vulnerable because the goddess protected him and made him invulnerable. Figured that he'd always be facing his enemies.
Right.
So he'd never need to worry about his back.
Right.
But it was his friend, or people that pretended to be his friend, put a spear in his back.
Well,
But I wonder if that Siegfried came from the idea Wagner had was from Achilles.
Mm.
Whether he might have gotten the idea of that vulnerable spot on the hero.
Very possibly. One of the things I think is so interesting about, he's mentioning the myth of Siegfried, which is very similar to the idea of the Achilles heel. Siegfried, and I know all this because of my husband who reads Old Norse, so that's how I know these stories. But I think it's fascinating the way different mythological traditions tend to have tend to resonate in the same way. You get sort of these stories that repeat, and the story of Siegfried is that he bathes himself in dragon blood, which is why he's invulnerable, except for this one place on his back also where a linden leaf falls, so that the dragon blood can't get to it. Similar with Achilles in the story of his mother holding him by the heel and dipping him in. So he's invulnerable everywhere except for that place where his mother held him. Actually, what's funny about that story is that my students they always completely object to that story. They say it doesn't make any sense, that is just so smart, why doesn't she dip him by the other heel after? The water would definitely get under your fingers. So I always find it funny to tell that story because my students every time object to it. Yes?
Can you talk a little about Iphigenia, the whole issue in Clytemnestra afterwards?
Yes, so this is one of my favorite stories that only really shows up a very little bit in the novel, which is the story of Agamemnon's wife. It's the story of Agamemnon's ongoing family dysfunction, which goes back quite a long way. He comes from the house of Atreus, which is the dysfunctional family in Greek mythology. There's cannibalism, there's incest, it's crazy. But Agamemnon is very much a part of this tradition. So when Agamemnon sets off to lead this war to Troy, the goddess Artemis is angry about all the bloodshed that's going to happen with the war. And so what she does is she actually becalms the ships at a place called Aulis. She says that the Greek ships cannot sail unless there's some sort of sacrifice made to appease her anger. And the sacrifice that ends up being sort of in the offing is Agamemnon's daughter Iphigenia, who is called to Aulis, and then Agamemnon kills her. There are so many different versions of this story. In some of them she goes willingly, in some of them she's really a dupe. But we know one thing is for sure, which is that her mother, who was not party to this plan, is enraged because her husband has murdered their daughter for his own desire to go and loot the rich city of Troy. And so for the 10 years that Agamemnon is off at the war, having killed their daughter, appeased the goddess, sailed off to war, Clytemnestra, his wife, is grieving for the death of her daughter and hating her husband. And she ends up having an affair while he's gone with his cousin. And when he finally comes back 10 years later, she pretends to welcome him. She leads him to the bathtub. She says, "Oh, honey, you must be so tired after 10 years and such a long trip." And then she kills him with an axe in the bathtub. And, it's strong. I sort of always feel I do not advocate killing people with axes, but I have to say, if anyone has it coming, it's Agamemnon. I mean, really. So she's a very interesting figure because it often happens that, you have someone like Achilles or Agamemnon who behave in pretty horrendous ways, but they still get called heroes. But someone like Clytemnestra, who is, avenging her daughter and sort of dispatching this her rotten husband, she is a villain to end all villains in the story. So I think there's a real double standard there in terms of the women and the men of ancient Greek mythology. One of the things that is also interesting, kind of an amazing coda to that story of Clytemnestra and Agamemnon coming back, is the story of Cassandra, another one of the daughters of Priam and Hecuba. She's Hector's sister, and she's taken captive by Agamemnon and brought back to Greece to be his slave. But Cassandra, as you may know from the mythology, has the ability to see what's going to happen in the future, but no one ever believes her about what's going to happen. And so she's sitting outside with all of Agamemnon's stuff, all his war prizes that he's brought home, watching Clytemnestra welcome him inside, and she can see the murder happening in her mind. And she not only can see the murder happening of Agamemnon, but she can see the fact that she's next. And there's this unbelievable moment where she realizes that she's going to die, and that there's nothing she can do, and no one who can help her. And then sort of Clytemnestra comes to the door and is like, "Cassandra, won't you come in?" Cut to black. But it's an incredibly moving story that even in those moments of sort of Clytemnestra's vengeance, you still get these people who are basically completely innocent suffering. I think the Greek myths are so attuned to suffering. And revenge. Yes.
It's funny how you read into Clytemnestra, because I would say he did something that Agamemnon did something that in her mind deserved what she did. And he killed the daughter.
Right.
Sacrificed her.
Right. I think it's.
But how does that play through all the interpretations of history? They all think she's a villain, and I was surprised when you said that.
She is often considered a villain. She certainly is the villain of the Odyssey. She doesn't appear in the Odyssey at all, but Odysseus spends a lot of the Odyssey anxious that when he gets home, that's what Penelope is going to do to him. That sort of the story of Clytemnestra and Agamemnon hangs over the entire Odyssey. And you hear Agamemnon, when he goes to the underworld and he talks to Achilles, he also talks to Agamemnon, who's like, "My wife is the worst. You wouldn't believe what she did to me," because now he's dead, killed with an axe in the underworld. You better watch out. Agamemnon says that your wife doesn't do the same thing to you. And so she really is kind of the boogeyman of the Odyssey. But there are also hints that, she was also considered not quite so villainous. You see that particularly in the Oresteia, because after she kills Agamemnon, her son, Orestes, is in this situation where he's the son, his father's been murdered, you have to avenge your father's death. But in avenging his father, he has to kill his mother, which is forbidden. So Orestes is in this horrible situation where whatever he does is wrong. If he kills his father, it's wrong, and if he doesn't kill his father, it's wrong. So he chooses to kill his father. I'm sorry, if he kills his mother. Thank you. So he chooses to kill his mother, and he's haunted by Furies for an entire book who follow him, sort of hounding him because he has committed the sin of killing his mother. So interestingly enough, the Furies still stand up for Clytemnestra, even though she's kind of considered villainous. He still gets in trouble for killing his mom, even though, you know, she's sort of considered a villain. So it isn't all villainous. There's still, you know, the mother-son bond, the mother bond is still primary and still considered really important. Now, eventually Orestes is forgiven and the Furies go away, but they really give him a very hard time first. So it's complicated. It's complicated. Yes?
I read the Iliad 50 years ago, so my memory is a little hazy. Tell me, Aeneas, is there much, I've read the Aeneid much more recently, but is there much about Aeneas in the Iliad?
There is a very little bit. The question's about Aeneas, who is the hero of Virgil's great epic, his sort of version of the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Roman Iliad and the Odyssey. I love the Aeneid. I think it is the equal of the Iliad and the Odyssey. Virgil is one of my greatest inspirations, so I absolutely love it. And there's a fascinating little bit of Aeneas that happens in the Iliad. So Aeneas is a Trojan. He's sort of a Trojan nobleman. He's not Hector's direct sibling, but he's kind of a cousin of the royal family. And he's a very good fighter, but he has this destiny, which is he's going to survive the fall of Troy and go off and found sort of new Troy, which in the Roman version of the mythology is Rome. He's going to found the Roman people. And so when the Romans actually conquered the Greeks, they were like, aha, this is vengeance for the Trojans, because we're Trojans. So, you know, we can take you over because this is fair now. This is Hector's revenge on you all. So it's interesting how they kind of justified that. But Aeneas shows up in the Iliad because he runs into Achilles when Achilles is in his rage. And they sort of have this conversation where Aeneas is going to fight Achilles when Achilles is kind of on his way to kill Hector. And the god Poseidon, who's on the Greek side, sees this happening. And he's like, hello, is anyone paying attention? Achilles is about to kill Aeneas, and he has a destiny. Someone has to do something. But the other gods are not really paying attention. So Poseidon's like, okay, I'm on the Greek side, but I know Aeneas has destiny, so I'll go save him even though he's Trojan. And that's actually what happens, is that Poseidon has to go down and rescue Aeneas from Achilles. And Aeneas has to be rescued again in the Iliad. He runs into the warrior Diomedes, and Diomedes throws this huge boulder at Aeneas and crushes his hip, and he's, you know, completely crippled and down in the battle. And his mother, Aeneas does have a goddess mother like Achilles, and he even has a more powerful goddess mother. Aeneas' mother is Aphrodite, the goddess of love herself. So the goddess of love swoops down to save her son, you know, with his crushed hip, down lying on the ground in the battlefield, and Diomedes sees her. And Diomedes has been instructed by the goddess Athena, who hates Aphrodite. It's very mean girls up there, who hates Aphrodite. Athena says, Diomedes, if you see Aphrodite, you can stab her. So Diomedes does. He sees her and he stabs her right in the wrist. He gets her in the wrist. And Aphrodite, who's not a warrior goddess, screams and drops her son and runs away. Aphrodite is not the mother you would want in the ancient world. And the god Apollo actually comes and saves Aeneas. So Aeneas shows up. He does not cover himself in glory in either of those instances. It's kind of mostly about his relationship to the gods. But what you see is that he's clearly protected by the gods, and that will sort of bear fruit in the Aeneid and later on. Yeah, I know. It's fair. You can't get the gods mad at you. You need them. I think we have time. I don't want to keep you guys too late, but I think we have time for one more.
The whole war was to save get back Helen. It doesn't say what ever happened to Helen.
Mm.
Did they ever save her? Did she ever go back?
The question of Helen, so the question is about what happens to Helen. Helen is such an interesting figure in the stories because so many people have tried to sort of get inside her head, and there's so many different versions. There's actually one pretty well-known version of the myth about Helen that she isn't even in Troy. The gods send a golden phantom in her place, and she spends the 10 years hanging out in Egypt. So, you know, you kind of can't get to the story, but what we know from the mythology is that in the Odyssey, she's back with Menelaus, and she goes back to Sparta. So Menelaus takes her back after those 10 years, and they go back to Sparta, and they seem pretty loving with each other. She seems to, you know, no one really talks about, hey, remember that time when you left me for 10 years? You know, it sort of seems okay, and we see them because Odysseus' son, Telemachus, is trying to find his father, and so he goes to visit his father's old war buddies, and that's where we see Helen. She's at Sparta with Menelaus when Odysseus' son goes to visit. So she seems to be okay. she seems to have emerged. Paris, of course, he's killed. Paris does not survive the war, but Helen does. Oh.
In the Greek mythology, who goes into the underworld? What is the underworld?
So the underworld, again, a very kind of complicated question. Our idea of the kind of Judeo-Christian idea of heaven and hell, very, very different from what the ancient Greeks believed. There was kind of, everyone went to, if you were given proper burial, everyone went down to the underworld. And then a few people who were particularly bad, if you had angered the gods, for instance, you were sent to Tartarus, which is where we get the stories of like Sisyphus with his rock, rolling the rock up the hill, and then as soon as he gets to the top, it falls back down again. So really brutal punishments that you would not want to spend eternity doing. So a few people get those, and then a few people end up in the Elysian Fields, which are sort of the beautiful place for heroes. But everyone else is just down there. And what we see is that the spirits do retain their memories of life. That they don't let go of who they are. They still retain their anger, their love, all of those feelings. Agamemnon is still complaining when we see him in the underworld. So that was their idea. Thank you all so much.